Welcome to the Environmental Transformation Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Grady, and our mission is to bring you interviews with leaders in the environmental industry with the goal of providing you information about industry trends, climate change, future energy, circular economy, regulatory topics, and service providers making an impact in the industry. So today's guest is Ryan Cooper. Ryan's the Director of Circular Economy Solutions and Organic Recycling Lead at Rubicon. So, Ryan, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Sean.
Great, man. Glad to have you. And, hey, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, what your role is there at Rubicon, and tell us a little bit about Rubicon.
Okay, wonderful. So at Rubicon, I manage the Circular Economy Solutions team.
Mm-hmm.
So on that team, we deal with sustainable materials management or zero waste programs for
Mm-hmm.
our customers, waste audits, metal recycling, regulated and hazardous waste, as well as lots of hard to recycle materials, all different kinds of plastics, mattresses, carpets, car bumpers, x-ray machines, whatever our clients throw at us. And I am the organics recycling lead. So there's a small team of us that focus specifically on organics recycling, which is still in that hard to recycle material category. So.
Yeah, right. No, there's a lot of interest now in that organic space, and so let's dive into a little bit about that. Tell us a little bit more about the circular economy solutions and this organic recycling lead. That you are what you're doing there. Like, how difficult is it to find these outlets for food waste?
Right. So my background is really in, agriculture and horticulture, and so I started a state permitted composting facility down in North Carolina, and then got a master's in regenerative studies where I study municipal anaerobic digestion and composting programs in the U.S., Canada, and Europe, and so I have a background in helping cities and businesses develop organics recycling programs. So,
Mm-hmm.
food waste and organics, just to break that down here to kind of set the stage. Organics recycling is really a larger category of, we say anything that was once alive, or if it grows, it goes. So any kind of natural material that is going to turn into soil, basically. So that could be a napkin or a paper towel. It could be sludges. It could be wood waste. But like you said, lots of focus on food waste right now. And that really is the epitome of the circular economy because it's such a clear circle from eating an apple, putting the apple core in the compost, making beautiful compost, and putting that on your apple tree so that it produces more apples, and that healthy soil creates plant health and human health. And so it's such a clear circle there with organics that that's really the goal for products in general. So no matter what we buy and what we consume, to create products that can cycle like that. So designing products with the end use in mind so that those products can be repurposed, reused, repaired, pretty much anything but tossed into a landfill in that
Mm-hmm.
linear make take waste model.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, I have been watching the industry, transition now into this whole mindset of circular economy, and the challenges that are out there. They're still very significant. There's a lot of like still roadblocks out there for us, right? But in the circular economy concept, as you just mentioned, the biggest I think opportunity for us is recycling organic food waste, right? Isn't that the biggest culprit we have?
It's just a no-brainer, and the positive thing is that it is very heavy, and it's very wet, and it creates a lot of weight. So nowadays, when people are measuring their diversion from the landfill, so the percentage of stuff that is not going into the landfill, a lot of times they're doing that based on tonnage. Now, a lot of people are developing carbon avoidance goals as well. And a lot of people think of transportation or energy when they think about carbon. But organics kind of ticks both of those boxes because it's very heavy. And so it increases the diversion rate
Hmm.
for companies and cities. And then it also has a big carbon effect because not only does food waste cause a lot of methane when it goes in the landfill, which is a potent greenhouse gas that has a big climate impact, but once you divert food scraps and other organics from the landfill, not only are you avoiding those methane emissions, but if you're making soil healthier, then actually it has a cumulative effect because then that soil not only sequesters that carbon that you put in it by putting that compost back into the soil, but it gets healthier and it sequesters even more carbon. The plants are even healthier, so they're sequestering more carbon. So it really has a layered effect. So like I said, it ticks a lot of those boxes and is the low hanging fruit, I guess, to say that.
Yeah, no, that's good. Well, you're right. Those nutrients that the soil receives from all that compost is just fantastic, and it's a huge benefit. Well, what are some of the challenges and opportunities in the business or for businesses who want to compost? Like, hey, we know we generate a lot of food scrap, a lot of food waste. We really would like to start a composting component of our waste program, but it's not really there. We don't really have the space, or we don't have the understanding how to really do it well. What are some of the challenges that people face in that who really want to make a difference?
Yeah, so you ticked off a couple of them right off the bat. So um, when you say, hey, we really want to compost, that is where a lot of people are at today, is that they'd like to divert their organics from the landfill, but really just don't know how. Sometimes it takes convincing to even put that on the table as a priority. So,
Hmm.
assuming that it is a priority, there are still tons of challenges. You mentioned space, that is a very big one. There's also operational challenges. So basically, what kind of container are you going to use? There's training, there's education. A lot of times, if it's someone high up in the organization that really wants to make this happen, once it gets down to the person that's actually putting material in those containers, are they keyed into the fact that it's a priority and really every single level in between? And so making sure that the entire organization is on board, that's a really big challenge. A lot of people are thinking cost, is this going to cost us more? A lot of people are thinking about what I call the yuck factor, the ick factor, where it's this magical thing where it's a delicious burger until you're done with it, and then it's really gross, and isn't that going to smell? And it's so funny because people have a dumpster full of food waste, but as soon as you tell them to put it in a separate container, they say, "Oh my gosh, isn't that going to cause
Yeah,
rats and smells?" And there's like
they're already
trash
there.
juice coming out of their dumpster, and I'm like, you literally are talking about the same thing you're throwing
Yeah.
out today, just putting it in a different container. So I call it a flick of the wrist. It's just putting it in a green bin instead of a black bin. So lots of challenges. I think people don't know the whole process. So, don't know exactly where that material is going to go, don't know, what's going to happen to it. And so can't necessarily visualize it. And so that's one of the key solutions is showing them a program that does work, showing them an anaerobic digestion or a composting facility so that they can see for themselves, where that material goes. And they say, oh, okay, this is how the whole process works, because a lot of people are throwing out food waste every day, but don't know that there are alternative beneficial reuses for that material.
Well, okay, so let's talk a little bit about some of the outlets and the where can people send food waste.
Yep. And so, of course, we follow the EPA food recovery hierarchy. So we help folks donate perfectly edible food whenever possible. And after that, there are plenty of instances where it's not able to be donated. And so animal feed is the next, stage in the EPA food recovery hierarchy. It also has economic benefits because farmers are buying feed. And so if they can use a waste product as an input into their operations, then everybody, is able to save money. So there's a couple reasons why animal feed, it keeps it higher in that food chain. So animals make waste, and then you can still use that waste once that product has gone through that cycle. So after that, there's a number of different processes. And again, it really depends on what kind of material you're talking about. So used cooking oil and other materials can go into biofuels like biodiesel. There are ethanol production with stuff like soda and beer. There's anaerobic digestion where you're making renewable natural gas, which is methane, but you're making it using microbes to create that renewable natural gas. And then after all of those processes, you still have residuals that you can compost and get those plant nutrients back into the soil, and again promote that soil biology so that you can grow more food and grow more crops and feed more people and feed more animals and keep the cycle going.
Man, I mean that description that you just said, I mean that is like a full on circular approach. I mean from generation to regeneration. That was really good summary there. So we'll talk about some of the maybe some success stories you've had with helping customers solve this organic, diversion process in their business.
Yep. So one of the challenges that we didn't talk about was infrastructure. So the successes really lie where the infrastructure does exist.
Mm-hmm.
And there are facilities that can take these products, and there are haulers or transportation partners that are able to move that material. So that's number one. Also, regulation is a big driver. So in some places, it's the law that people have to do this. So, look into areas like Austin, Texas, and California, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and now New Jersey, New York. There are about 8 states plus Washington, D.C., where it is, mandated, and then also a handful of cities throughout U.S. and Canada that are also requiring this. And so really easy to find examples where those mandates exist. It gets harder and harder when you get away from those population centers, where you get away from those farmers that are needing those materials. So, some of the great successes, have been with fast casual chains that do make this a priority and want, organics recycling implemented at every single one of their locations. So, a lot of times they'll use certified compostable food serviceware. Those are some examples of success stories. And then others include depackaging facilities. So one of the big, really shining examples of diversion from the landfill involves, pallets and pallets, truckloads and truckloads of material that, because of the nature that they're shrink wrapped and they're in cardboard boxes, inside of plastic bags, inside of those cases, stacked on pallets, doesn't look a lot like food waste. And in a lot of cases, there is no outlet for that material. And so you're talking, again, tractor trailer loads of material that if it doesn't have a depackaging outlet, then it has to go to the landfill. So some of the biggest successes as far as tonnages go are where, animal feed or anaerobic digestion or composting partners have that depackaging capability because they're able to get to that food waste in there, recycle the cardboard box boxes and the other materials that those products come in. Ethanol production is another great example of that. They're able to get to those kegs or those beer bottles or those cans. And again, that represents a significant amount of weight diverted from the landfill and carbon avoided by creating that methane in our
Mm-hmm.
landfill.
I hadn't thought about the whole packaging and depacking, of, say expired food, right? That's, and then figuring out that part of the equation to solve, to really kind of still divert the food waste and from the landfill to an actual, end use that's beneficial. And then I think there's still opportunity to recycle those products that were packed in, it was packed in, right? So yeah, that's another tricky aspect to, solving this, organic recycling puzzle. I mean, it's not just the food piece too. You also have other parts of the food packaging piece that's, that's a recyclable. Most of the times it's recyclable. Some of these products are probably packaged in quote unquote single use plastics that don't really have a high value, or an outlet for recycling. Is that true?
And if it's a mixed load where you've got, 25 different pallets of 25 different products, it gets really hard to clean and capture any kind of single, call it HDPE or
Mm-hmm.
polypropylene, PP. If you've got, one single type of packaging, that makes it a little bit easier. But when it's mixed, that can cause challenges. Of course, like I said, if is food attached to it, cleaning that product can be a challenge, but really contamination is one of the biggest challenges in recycling in general, but also with food waste programs. So, folks aren't always sure what is and what isn't, compostable or digestible in an anaerobic digestion facility. And so sometimes depackaging machines are used in residential or even commercial programs where they're running, a single, a source separated organic stream through a depackaging machine or other types of methods to really clean up that product. And that is a huge pain point for anaerobic digesters and for composters, because if material is coming in, whether it's packaged or whether it's, coming from a commercial or residential route and it's full of trash and other contaminants, it can be extremely challenging to make sure that the products at the end of the day that these facilities are generating are clean, and are able to be sold. And so it's one of the biggest challenges in the industry today, for sure.
Yeah, yeah, I imagine so. What about, you talked about some of these commercial companies out there, and I gotta imagine some of the packaging that some of this food comes in, or some of the food that we buy, maybe even in the fast food realm, could be quote unquote, biodegradable, right? Where, to make the ease of composting or recycling the organics, if the products were quote unquote packaged in a more environmentally friendly biodegradable, system, could that really transform the whole organic recycling process even further? Say, and just say, let's just say McDonald's. Okay, that's a big company, many stores. What if they were to get on board with, organic recycling of all the food that is wasted at the end of the meals? Are you, because I mean, I had kids. I mean, you go and they wouldn't eat half the meal, and you're just throwing it, you're chunking it in the garbage. Come on. I mean, how much food, organic foods, recycling could be done under those circumstances if we had companies like that, creating programs to divert from trash.
Yeah, and McDonald's is actually a leader throughout their entire supply chain in making this shift. We don't use the term biodegradable in the industry. We use the term certified compostable.
Okay.
Still pretty contentious because what happens is that there's a lot of lookalike products or products that have the word green in them and things like that. And folks that are ordering and trying to do the right thing are buying products that aren't actually certified compostable, meaning they meet certain ASTM standards or are certified by BPI, which is the main certifying body here in the US. There's also the Compost Manufacturers Alliance that is working on field testing those because there is resistance from some composters to accept that certified compostable material because it is mixed with other materials. And so you're not sure if that's a certified compostable straw or just another green straw that's sitting next to it. And from a loader, they all kind of look like trash. And so that's a huge topic in the industry right now. And so the ideal, really, I think, is that, you can look at a company like Taco Time or a company like Sweetgreen, where basically everything they serve is certified compostable food serviceware. They provide a front of house bin, and boom, right there, their entire waste stream goes from 100% landfill because it's mixed with food and other recyclables and non-recyclables to, completely diverted from the landfill. For me, I think that, with consumers having to decide what goes in what bin, if we can just say, listen, it all goes in this one bin. Some other examples is at the Seattle Mariners Stadium, and now here in Atlanta at the Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Stadiums and closed events centers like that have an advantage because you're not bringing in outside materials, which can kind of throw off the whole game. But if everything at a venue is certified compostable, then consumers and customers don't have to make a
Even think
choice.
about it. Yeah, they don't even think about it. Right.
Yeah.
Right. No, that is where, to me, the value of designing strategies for companies like that is huge. I mean, that's where, that's kind of like the silver bullet almost, right? Like, hey, you want to be sustainable, you want to eliminate, MSW. Let's create your organic recycling program and then do it that way, and then have a benefit. I mean, there's still cost involved, obviously, right? There's still going to be cost involved with the company to buy that type of certified packaging, to still, transport, food to, or, recycling, compost facilities, or companies who would take it, right? But I think it'd still be a really huge benefit, and now in today's society, and the environmental awareness that we see amongst companies, this ESG is really taken over, and climate change is like the hot topic, and everyone's trying to figure out how to get to zero net carbon by 2035 and things like that. And they're really putting that out there, for public to hear. I mean, they're basically responding to public demand in a sense too, right? So it's got to be like one of the top of mind type topics for some of these companies to do this.
And going back to infrastructure, it gets really hard for them to, just first of all, packaging is difficult. And I would definitely be scared of anything that we're going to call a silver bullet because in the trash and recycling game, they really tend not to exist. But, the reason why this one is problematic, one of the reasons is because if somebody wants to change their entire packaging scheme, that's a big deal. That can take years. And then if they do that, they're looking at, hundreds of regulations across different municipalities based on what they can and can't serve. And then that infrastructure. So if they change their whole packaging suite nationwide or worldwide to one type of packaging suite, then at places where it's not acceptable, then what do you do then? And so they have a really hard time navigating all those different regulations because it's so complicated and so fragmented, especially here in the US.
Well, let's talk about the regulations. How are they affecting the industry?
Yeah, so I mentioned it earlier. I think they're a big driver, if anything, just directionally. Now, I think more than that, they're driving innovation, they're driving investment. That's where, again, I think you're going to see more and more infrastructure because the regulation is there. So the capital is going to flow there because it's basically,
A
if you
requirement.
build it, they will come because it's the law. The positive, really cool thing is that folks sometimes do that even when no regulations exist, and
Hmm.
there's still that demand, and so that's the really exciting part. But I think it sets the stage for the folks that don't necessarily have that regulation to again see those models of what works, what doesn't work, and then replicate those models again, whether that regulation exists or not.
That's right. Well, we've been in this past year and a half now, or more, a little more than that now, it seems like, but in this whole COVID pandemic, right? I mean, what kind of impact have you seen in the recycling industry with food waste as it relates to COVID?
Lots of different impacts. So first of all, lots of office buildings, restaurants, cafes, lots of folks, basically came to a screeching halt. So a lot more material went into those residential streams. And, speaking for myself, when I went into the office every day at Rubicon, we had every recycling program known to man. We could recycle any product that we had, but at home, it's a little harder to create those programs. And, with all the takeout, all of that single serve, I mean, it was widespread no matter what type of products were being handed out wherever you were. It was a lot more single serve, disposable products, and including the masks that I still see all over the sidewalk everywhere. And so it is it I think it caused people to maybe take a step back, but I also think that sustainability is not going anywhere. And if anything, it has continued to progress. So I know my mantra last year was that, sustainability, if anything, is much more important. And so in the food supply chain specifically, I mean, you saw those stories about, the farmers that had to euthanize all those animals. There was lots of materials that were in wholesale packaging for those restaurants and for those cafeterias that had to, basically be disposed of because of everybody had to shift to retail packaging, so there was a big change there. But I think that that hiccup in the processing plants, and I think it really opened a lot of eyes to what the food system is and the fragility of pieces of it. And so I think that for me, a lot of the lessons that came out of it are resilience and adaptability, flexibility, and local sustainable solutions, because
Yeah.
the more the closer those loops are to the cities that we live in, or the communities that we live in, and the less kind of complicated and abstract those supply chains are, I think the more resilient they are and the more adaptable they are. And so I think that I had people coming out of the woodwork that have never talked to me about waste and recycling say, what's up with all these, to-go containers, or all of this, personal protective equipment that is everywhere? What are we going to do about all of this waste that we're all creating? So I think, people were at home, so they saw it. There was no leaving it at the restaurant. There was no, away. And that's the bottom line, is that, the more people realize that there is no away,
Yeah,
that's a
it's in their
step.
face. They
Yeah,
got to
that's a
deal
step
with it,
toward
right? Yeah,
exactly.
right. I mean, so talking about the supply chain of food, and there was a bit of, and early on, there was a bit of some challenges of getting food, you know, enough to kind of supply the needs of all us consumers. And I mentioned this in previous podcasts, but my wife and I, we started a garden, back in 2000, early 2020, or I'm sorry, yeah, early 2020. And, we had been planning for it in 2019, not knowing, COVID was going to hit. But, luckily we were able to grow our own produce. And it just kind of like, wow, there was a craze on people just wanting to grow their own food, be more organic. And then this whole concept of this whole circular process, or this whole, recycling of food waste and composting, I think really hits home a lot closer now to people who have now begun to kind of be involved in that. So I think it's great. And it's necessary, right? Because food waste seems to be, one of the, and not seems to be, it is one of the largest components of the waste process, or the waste that's being generated that we're disposing in our country.
Right. I mean, something like 30 to 40% of the food
Right.
that we produce, never gets consumed. And all of that water, all that fuel, all that land, all those resources that take to, grow that food, to pack it, to transport it, to distribute it, to get it to those grocery stores. And then, during the early months of the pandemic, when all those grocery shelves were empty, and that, food supply chain experienced a lot of hiccups, I think that you saw a huge increase in home gardening. Again, that's going to create more resiliency and more
Yep.
self-sufficiency. And
Yep.
it had a side benefit of creating a lot of demand for compost. So
Yeah, it did. It did. Absolutely, it did. Yeah. No, and that kind of brings to the realization of the full circular process here, right? I mean, I'll tell you what, one of the best movies that I've ever seen on YouTube, and you've probably seen it, but is I think it's called the Biggest Little Farm. It's
I
on
haven't seen it.
YouTube. Okay, so this movie is about this whole process of what we're talking about, the whole circular process of managing a farm in California, and creating that whole ecosystem of regenerative everything from livestock to produce to fruits and vegetables to compost and fertilizing, right? And then this movie's just amazing. Highly recommend it. And it's very well done, and I think people get a lot of benefit out watching that movie. Um, well, what are some of the common maybe myths about recycling food waste that you'd like to debunk? You know?
Yeah. So, again, I kind of mentioned that ick factor, and as somebody that really started in, as a composter at farms, where if a cow died, or 25 chickens got mauled by a raccoon, you throw them in a pile and they turn into beautiful black dirt. I mean, there's a lot of science, there's a lot of art to it. But one thing that I would recommend is everybody reading the book Humanure Handbook, because one of the biggest kind of gaps in this cycle is the waste that our own bodies produce, and we call it biosolids in the industry. So I lived in various different types of communities and went to various different types of festivals that had composting toilets, and I had only a composting toilet at home for about 2 years. Um,
Oh,
so I mean, I think that that's one of the biggest, if you can handle composting your own human ore, then I think like food waste becomes a lot less icky. And so I think that, again, seeing these processes, how many folks have been to a water resource recovery facility, what we used to call wastewater treatment plants? That's a huge opportunity for any city that has a water resource recovery facility, that's literally millions and millions and millions of gallons every day coming into these facilities, and thousands, if not millions of tons of material that is part of that process that generations and generations knew the value of that type of material. So I think that there's that whole kind of conception of waste as gross and disgusting. And like I said, it's this magical thing. From the hamburger is delicious until you put it in the waste bin, and then it's nasty, And so, what's up with that? Why do we look at waste not as a resource? Or why do we use
Right.
a cup for 30 seconds and then we throw it in the trash and not see that as
A
something that could
recyclable
be
value.
recyclable?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right. No, exactly. Well, it's funny you bring up the whole humanoid compostable, biogas type stuff. I'm actually going to be doing, and this is a little teaser for next week, but I'm actually doing an interview with Home Biogas.
Yeah.
So check them out on the internet. Home Biogas. They basically have developed a little small biodigester you can put in your backyard, put all your food scraps in, and it generates, you know, um, renewable natural gases you can, basically use to fuel your cook stove and other, devices at home. And you're self sufficient, right? So, and you have compost that you can use, put on your garden, and have more nutrients and better quality food production. It's
Yeah,
gonna
we
be
call
awesome.
that in permaculture. I'm a certified permaculture designer and teacher, and we call that stacking function. So, if you can take your food scraps, feed it to your chickens, get some eggs and meat out of it, then put it in your biodigester where you can create some renewable natural gas, then compost it, you're maximizing those resources. And I've read that there's about 3 million of those small scale digesters in China alone. Again, lots of communities, including hog farmers and dairy farmers and other farmers here in the US that are utilizing that manure. So, take a hog lagoon that used to kind of stink up the neighborhood. You literally just put a cover on it, and boom, you got an anaerobic digester that can help power the farm. You've made the neighborhood a little bit less stinky. You've got, power that you can use and also spread out to the community. So, it's a win-win-win all the way around. And again, those are examples of resources that we weren't necessarily capturing, but I think, the more and more that we can capture all those resources, instead of just, referring to them as waste and wanting to get them away, that's, a step in the right direction.
Yeah, it's that realization that, that product and that material, it's got value, you
Exactly.
know? It's got value, it's not waste. It's basically another form of, revenue or potential gold, like in a sense. I mean, it's a commodity that needs to be harnessed through it the rest of its life cycle, right? So that's great. I love that. So we're talking about all these concepts of changing people's minds about this, right? I mean, because that is the big problem I think that we have in society is this paradigm shift of, so to speak, of mentality of thinking, hey, it's waste, get rid of it, versus it's something of value. So how can we leverage education for business and consumers around these concepts to make this switch, this environmental transformation?
So I mean, that is the point, that is really the number one question. And, folks are busy. Folks have a lot of priorities. When we're talking about doing this at businesses, dealing with their trash and recycling is not necessarily their number one priority. They've got a business to run. And so I think, part of it is incentivizing folks. So, some of recyclable materials, call it cardboard. I mentioned used cooking oil earlier. I mean, if there's a financial incentive, I think farmers are always looking for a way to diversify, then that's a pretty obvious and very prolific way in our society to incentivize people is, with money. And so that's kind of an easy way to make the switch. And so, I kind of think of my job as fighting the landfill every day. And so if I can save someone $1 or $5, per ton versus the landfill, then it makes it easier to make that switch. But it's not everything, because there is so much to habit, and this is the way we've always done it. And
Right. Yeah.
there's so much to that culture change part. And so, you asked about leveraging education. And, one of the things that we always say is using champions. So at every level within an organization, if you can find a champion who's truly bought in, that can be there at every step of the way to show their peers, hey, let's just take one more second to put it in the green bin instead of the black bin, or the blue bin instead of the black bin, then that is one way that, again, you're showing people, oh, hey, this wasn't that hard after all. Or, a lot of people have a lot of questions about what is recyclable or what is compostable. It is very complicated, and it's very different depending on where you are. And so I'm certainly not blaming anyone for not knowing all the ins and outs of what is, recyclable, whether it's
Sure.
organics or other
Yeah.
materials. So having those champions embedded, and again, using case studies, showing people concrete examples of where it works. To me, that's everything. When somebody can see it and touch it and smell it and it's working, then, I feel like that is one thing that pushes people over the edge and say, oh, okay, I can do that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it sounds like a lot of the work you're doing seems to be around the industrial process. Is that fair to say?
Well, we really
Or you do
work.
residential?
No, we're mostly commercial. So
Okay.
we, as in Rubicon, has a smart cities practice where we implement technology in municipal fleets all around the world, more than 50 cities around the world to date. So we do have, part of our business that impacts residential collection programs, but our main line of business is commercial. Trash and recycling programs. So, with organics, I like to say that wherever there's people, there's food waste. There's going to be someone who doesn't eat the crust on their peanut butter and jelly. So,
Yeah.
whether that's
Wherever there's people,
restaurants,
there's food waste. That's right.
yeah, they're there. And so, office buildings, grocery stores, but then again, you get into those distribution centers. You mentioned food manufacturing. There's basically every scale out there. And so, I do want to take this opportunity to definitely, let people know that there is really large scale industrial organics recycling facilities, whether again they're ethanol or anaerobic digestion or composting facilities that are taking hundreds or thousands of tons a day. And then there's all the way down to small, community gardens, small organizations that are picking up, material on a bike, whether it's from a business or from your home. And then there's home composting, because a significant amount of the organics that today are going into the landfill are generated at the home level.
Yeah.
So
Right. Right.
that's one cool thing about organics recycling, is that it's very scalable. You don't have to necessarily build a landfill in your backyard to manage your organics responsibly.
No, you're right. No, that's a good point. I mean, I know, like in our office, we had a contract with a organics recycling. We just had a little bin in the break room, and staff would just throw it in there, and then we'd get it. So it was good, and they would come pick it up once a week. So it's good. Well, I mean, well, where do you see, areas of that may require further research on, let maybe say data collection or digital technologies to help maybe advance this this initiative within society to really embrace organic recycling?
Yeah, so there are great technologies out there that actually monitor what folks are throwing out. Again, whether that's trash and recycling, or specifically technologies that monitor the food waste that folks are throwing out. Because, one amazing thing is that when people realize how much food they are wasting, they tend to waste less because, especially for businesses, that's money down the drain, but for individuals as well. And so, if you can really track exactly what it is you're throwing out, then you can say, hey, they don't like the potato salad. Let's, make a little bit less of it next week. Those kinds of decisions. There's lots of cool technology around, preserving food longer and monitoring exactly which items or which pallets or which cases need to get sold first, or maybe don't need to go all the way across the country and
Hmm.
need to get sold like today locally. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity for technology, and that's really how Rubicon got started. Is because we saw that this was one of the industries that was really ripe for disruption. Because in the kind of old school trash and recycling model, there's not a lot of data, and so folks don't really know exactly what they are or are not throwing out. And so the more visibility that people have, and the more granular they can get on, exactly what they are wasting or recycling, then the better decisions that they can make. And so, I think that there's other things, like I am on the board of directors for the U.S. Composting Council, and I know that we are working on getting a NAICS code for composting facilities, so we can capture some of the data around the
How much
performance of those
volumes?
different
Yeah.
composting facilities, for instance. So there is just a lot of data that we don't have,
Right.
that will, again, inform better decision making.
I mean, at a really super granular level, say we're like, is there a way, do you think, to solve, or at least to start tracking, like, how much organic processing are we taking away at, say at an individual residential level? Like, hey, I come up, I pick up the green box, I pick up the recycling box, and I pick up my black box. I mean, do you ever think we'll get to the point where, the trucks that come in to pick up that waste will be measuring the volume of that stuff before they chunk it in the truck, and then start running that data analytically, and doing, AI work on this, advanced analytics and things like that? I mean, you think we're going to get to that level at some point, or what do you think?
I do, and that's an example of the type of technology that we helped implement with the city of San Antonio, for instance, in their yard waste program. But the best example that I can think of is in South Korea. They went from very little organics recycling in like 2013 to there's something like 95% diverted from the landfill. And so folks have an RFID tag, and so they go down to the community trash receptacle. They scan their RFID tag, and it actually charges you based on the weight of the organics that you're throwing out. And of course, it's illegal to throw them out with the regular trash. And so folks are incentivized again to reduce the amount of trash that they're, I'm sorry, reduce the amount of organics and trash as well, but we're talking about organics. And so they're going to waste less. There's a lot of dehydration there, so that you're reducing the weight and volume of that material, which makes it more stable and easier to transport. So I think that we probably will get there. And I think that once we have all that data, then we'll be able to make much smarter decisions. And I think, if you can pull up a board where it's like my block wastes less than your block, those kinds of
My
competition.
neighborhood's better than your neighborhood.
Yep. So I think that that kind of feedback loop really does help incentivize folks, because they can see their graph rising or lowering depending on what the goal is.
That's pretty cool, and I mean, it sounds like a really good thing, but I could see the flip side of that. People would say, "Man, that's a little too big brother for me," because now you're really kind of like forcing me to do this instead of, voluntarily kind of just being a good citizen, right?
Yeah, in King County, in the Seattle area, there was a lawsuit that addressed exactly that issue because there was basically trash police that would enforce the rule that you have to recycle your organics, and they basically had to stop. Trash is a sensitive thing because nobody really wants that level of detail. I've seen, smart bins that will tell you, what material to put in what bin. But is it also recognizing your face? And, of course they aren't, they wipe that data. But that is a fine line. How much do we really want to measure? And I think that that's one of those questions that outside of trash and recycling, we're going to be dealing with more and more as technology gets more and more granular.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. Well, how are you seeing movie or movies? How are you seeing more companies focusing on ESG move forward into carbon reduction? I mean, and how this is affecting their diversion. I mean, have you starting to see like there's a big focus on this aspect of their waste program to get to achieve those ESG goals?
Yep. And I mentioned that food waste is one of the earlier steps in that journey to sustainable materials management because it is heavy. So I think what happened is that folks that made their sustainability commitments early in the 2000s, those are coming due, and so folks
Yeah.
are really trying to figure out how to meet those goals. And folks that hadn't had goals before have goals now because it's sort of just the cost of doing business now. Both consumers and investors, as you mentioned earlier, these organizations are responding to demand, and so I think that without fail, folks either have goals or are quickly developing goals, and those goals are like really about to happen. And so, what does landfill free mean, or what does zero waste mean for these organizations? And what does kind of the future after, zero waste and meeting these goals really look like? What does that, reuse and repurposing and repairing and cleaning and washing and returning, what does all that infrastructure really look like? And I think that
Yeah.
we're laying the groundwork for all of that to happen. So I think it's really exciting. As I mentioned earlier, I do not think that that's going anywhere. I
Yeah,
think.
it's not going anywhere. It's only going to continue to increase. Well, how do you see businesses and municipalities approach, food waste moving forward? I mean, do you think there's going to be a big initiative with, say, communities, curbside, organic pickup, recycling? I mean, what do you think there?
Yep. So, I've been seeing recently that Boston's really, excited about it. So, I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, there are more and more residential organics recycling programs. I know that at the U.S. Composting Council, we are about to release the Target Organics website, which is going to be basically a roadmap for municipalities that are interested in organics recycling, specifically food waste recycling, because
Mm-hmm.
a lot of communities have a way to deal with leaves and yard waste.
Mm-hmm.
So incorporating food waste into those programs is quite a leap. So it's one that municipalities, just like businesses and individuals, are nervous about change and nervous about making those changes and messing up. And so I think that there is a lot of room there for municipalities to develop those programs. And I think that they are, again, more and more of them are taking that leap. And then I think that you see a lot of public-private partnerships where, businesses that do composting for a living are right there to help those municipalities. So I think you see a lot of,
Collaboration.
operators that are not necessarily the municipalities. They're getting someone else who has tons of experience and know how to come in and run those facilities or build those facilities. And so I think that that's part of the way that we get there, as far as meeting that infrastructure need, because again, the more and more cities that are able to deal with their biosolids and their food waste and their yard waste and their wood waste, especially when it's natural disasters, ice storms or hurricanes, and all of a sudden they've got literally millions of tons of debris. There's a big need, as more of those types of events happen, for those cities to be ready and have the infrastructure to be able to handle those types of
I
events.
think that's kind of one of those components of a city who has the interest of being more green, right? Being a green city, right? They're doing a good job of recycling things, but that's the one area that they still haven't been able to tackle yet. They still need to kind of overcome, right? They still need to kind of address the how do we process those things if we don't have the infrastructure. And no, that's a really good point there. I think that you just brought up. I'm glad to see that the recycle or compost councils helping cities do that.
Yeah, and I think that recycling also, took a big hit with the green fence, and green sword,
Yeah.
programs that really stopped importation of recyclable materials into China. And so I think that that is a similar story of municipalities that were used to doing things one way, and I think that, to your point, they all have solid waste management plans or goals or want to be as good as possible. But when the economics fell out of the recyclable market, there was lots of talk about recycling is dead and recycling is broken, and that's really not the case. It's really just a matter of our own infrastructure being able to handle our own recyclables, and that shift is happening, and those markets are coming back. And so I think that it's kind of a double whammy that, more organics recycling, more kind of traditional recycling infrastructure in the US are going to really help cities and businesses meet their diversion goals and their carbon avoidance goals as well.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Well, I think as the infrastructure catches up, which I think is going to start to, I mean, there's a big push now. I mean, a lot of states are like California has mandated, organic recycling in a lot of, I mean, the infrastructure is actually not there yet, but
Not
they've
even
mandated it.
close.
And so, there's a lot of activity going on over there. I know for a fact that, a lot of companies are working to really quickly to, help build that. And we're gonna see that infrastructure improve over time, and people are going to get more creative. There is going to be a financial impact, but there's going to be financial successes too, right? I mean, there's going to be companies that come in and fill in this void that are going to
Yes.
be successful,
Oh, yeah.
that can essentially make money on this commodity, but also provide a service that is necessary and needed to complete the whole cycle here, the whole circular cycle of this process, and to get the biggest value out of the food waste. So I'm really excited to see what happens in the future. Ryan, hey, you've done a really great job, describing a lot of the challenges of food waste and the challenges that we face, and the work that you're doing at Rubicon. I think you guys are doing a great job. Lots of great things happening there, and the work you're doing is just fantastic. I really appreciate you coming on the show today and sharing with us and the listeners about that. You got any last little parting shots you'd like to leave us before we go?
Well, thank you so much for having me, Sean. Really enjoy your podcast, and really honored to be here today. And I think that, for the listeners that are interested in this kind of thing, tell a friend, be that champion, start that composting pile, start that garden.
That's right.
support those businesses that are moving in that direction, because those votes with our dollars really matter, and those actions really speak way louder than words. Because if folks can see that, hey, it's not that big of a deal to grow a little bit of my own produce and be that much more self-sufficient, or handle my own organics on my own, or it's one of those things that we can really make a difference in our life every day. And so many problems seem so huge that this is one that we can really make an impact with our own two hands. So it's accessible. And I think, again, getting involved with those community gardens and urban farming organizations, and farmers markets, and really making that connection between the food that we buy and the waste that we produce, and that virtuous cycle of making sure that it winds up going back into the soil. I think that that's really, really powerful, and is really exciting. I think we're going to see a lot more of it. So
Yeah.
it's going to be fun to see.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Ryan, thanks for coming on. We'll look forward to getting this out in the next week, and appreciate your time today. And I'll make sure we put a link to your contact information on our website. Okay.
Thank you so much, Sean.
All right. Thank you.